Welcome to the Pooch Parenting Podcast, a podcast for parents with dogs. I'm Michelle Stern, a certified professional dog trainer, mom, and former teacher. Living with kids and dogs at the same time can feel like a circus. I know because I lived it too. Join us as we interview a variety of experts and parents to discuss topics that will make parenting with dogs easier, safer, and less chaotic. Also, you can love living with your dog again. I'll always keep it real, which might even mean that you hear the messiness of life in the background on occasion, but at least you know you're not alone. In all of my years as a dog and child specialist, I have rarely come across anyone who tries to support families in getting their dogs ready for a new baby if they're not pregnant. And as an adoptive parent myself, I think that it's really important that we support families who are growing in any number of ways, because families can grow traditionally or not. I want all of my people to feel seen. In today's episode, I interview an adoption expert so that we can set expectations to help every family succeed. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Kris. I am so excited that you agreed to be with us here today.
Hi, Michelle. I'm excited too. I think this is going to be really fun.
Well, I am thrilled to be talking about adoption, and not a dog adoption, but human adoption. And often in the dog world, when people are talking about adopting something, it's often about rescuing a dog from a shelter. But in this case, we're going to be talking about how to support parents as they bring a new child into their family, whether that's infant through adoption, an older child, any age child, whether it's through the foster system, it doesn't really matter, but this is bringing in a child that you have not carried yourself. And there are oftentimes a lot of questions that I get from people about how to prepare your dog for the sudden appearance of a new human in the family, especially when the dog hasn't seen any biological changes in the parents. I know from personal experience, because one of my children is adopted, that I probably had hormone changes or at least emotional changes throughout the process of our adoption, but it's different than a biological pregnancy where there's a precise start and a precise end. It's much more confusing. It's the timeline shifts and changes based on who's doing the paperwork, and you just never know when you'll be chosen and all of those kinds of things. But I'm going to have you introduce yourself, and then we'll dive in and talk about how we can support families through this process.
Great. My name is Kris Freeark, and I am a psychologist and a family therapist. I've done research on adoption, and I love to do adoption education. I am also an adoptive mom and a stepmom. So I have a lot of experience from many different angles on the process of family blending new members in. And we also have had dogs and more recently cats. But I know that as a family therapist, I always think of the family as a team. And when you integrate a new member to the team, everybody has to make adjustments. Everybody's going to shift. And if you can't, the most fun thing about being a family therapist is figuring out how to get everybody on board of thinking of themselves as a team and the special assets that each team member brings, as well as the challenges that any of them might have. And there are multiple challenges with adoption, as with having a child born into your family, because so much changes and everybody has needs and everybody has to pitch in, and you're getting to know each other in a new way. So I love the topic, and I have to say that until I heard about you, I have worked with adoptive families around pets, but I have never had anybody come to me and say, we're having trouble integrating our human and canine members. And I don't think I've ever had anybody come and say that the topic of pets came up in the process of their home study, or it's interesting to me to reflect back on that, because I've got a lot of adoptive families, always in the back of my head or the front of my head. And I always, when I'm working with families, I always ask about the pets when in figuring out, okay, how am I going to engage this family who, when they come to my office, are stressed, or they wouldn't be coming to me. I always want to know who of a non-human nature is in the family, and what are the reputations of those members of the team, because pets can soothe, pets can enliven, and pets can stress other family members. So I love the topic. I love what you're doing.
It's so interesting what you said, that it very rarely comes up in conversation. And I think that is a symptom of people feeling unsure and feeling ashamed that their pet is an issue, because social media would have you believe that pets are only a source of joy and humor, and maybe sadness when they die, but not that the pet is a source of extreme stress or anxiety. And so I find that very rarely will anyone ask for support or ask for advice unless they feel that perhaps safety is an issue, or unless someone like me brings it up, where I'm really putting it in the forefront of their mind and saying, I will not judge you if you are overwhelmed and you are questioning whether or not you made a mistake by blending animals and children, or whatever your situation might be. I'm not going to judge you for that. And I'll help you find relief, whether it's to try to modify the dog's behavior within the context of your family dynamic, or perhaps we decide that the dog might even be happier living somewhere else. Because as you know, with children, the same is true with dogs, that everybody has their own set of physiological, mental needs that have to be met. And so if a dog is sound sensitive and you have a child that has noisy rages, I'll use that as an example, or that has a laughter that never stops, which is really kind of a gift, but that still could cause undue stress to a dog who is sensitive to sound. And that's just a simple example, but that's a dog that's not necessarily in distress per se, but it's a dog that is finding itself in an uncomfortable environment for it to be relaxed and be its best doggy self.
Right.
And so I like that you talk about having everybody be a team and being integrated. You mentioned the home study thing. Nobody asked me, about our dogs or our dog situation. I mean, when they came to the house, they saw the dog because the dog was there and there's like a water bowl and stuff like that. But nobody made a point of saying, I remember specifically during the home study, they were like, okay, your knives have to be way up high and out of reach, and your medication has to be locked away, and all those kinds of things. But they never commented on the water bowl being a hazard, which of course it is. But of course, my son wasn't home yet. It was a non-issue at the time, but I wouldn't have thought of that back then, because I didn't know then what I know now, that little silly, ridiculous things like a dog water bowl can be a hazard. It could be a drowning hazard for a child. It could be a slipping hazard for you, because kids love to splash and then the floor gets slippery and someone can fall. The dog bed that has been in your family room forever, so your whole family can relax in the same space, can become a hazard from the standpoint of the fact that if you're not aware of it and your toddler crawls over to the dog bed, the dog can find that unpleasant. They can become protective of it. Or I have an older dog who does not like being startled awake. I don't know how she'll act if a toddler sneaks over and scares her half to death when she wakes up, by touching her or whatever. And that could result in a bite to a child. And I don't think that any home study person, social worker that we worked with was even aware that those were potential problems. I've helped doulas with this and midwives a little bit with this. because they're in the home a lot of the time. Sometimes people are doing home births, or maybe it's a postpartum doula who's in the home. And I'm trying to teach them how to read body language and understand, oh, that's a red flag. We probably should get help for that. But I don't really think it's a topic that is discussed, and I think it should be.
Well, but when I think about it now, I think also if it was discussed, it would likely become another thing that the expectant adoptive parents would get stressed about, because there is already such a feeling of being evaluated. Are we going to measure up? Are we going to be good parents? That if then the question is your kid going to be safe with your dog? Then I just can see their anxiety going in a completely new direction. So, but I mean, definitely preparation is better than being surprised by things. And to some extent, there's more that's unexpected in it. I mean, definitely the schedule is unpredictable. I mean, I think that adoptive parents often underestimate their resilience and their tolerance of uncertainty that came out of the process of adopting. And it's huge. I mean, parents who had to work to become parents are documentedly more invested in parenting. They take things seriously, they reflect a lot, and hopefully they reflect without the baggage of worry that is all too common for adoptive families. Because, and I was thinking when you were talking about how parents are hesitant to mention that they're struggling with their dog, adoptive parents are hesitant to mention that they're struggling with their kids, because they instinctively kind of take it as a reflection on them, their parenting, or that, oh my gosh, this is, I mean, most adoptive parents live with a worry that their child might not be well adjusted and happy. And there are assumptions and negative stereotypes about adoption that, even though they've improved to some extent, are still there. And I think that adoptive parents need to feel prepared to acknowledge those with their kids and counter them, to recognize that kids pick up on things that people project onto them, and there's no reason that those projections have to be accurate about them. So the themes that you talk about in terms of preparation and proactivity are really important for and communication, and sensing nonverbals are really important for adoptive families, and their pets, but also above and beyond their pets. Because it's complex.
Yeah. I really love what you're saying. I do agree. I think when I reflect back to when my son was little, there's a lot of pressure you put on yourself to compensate, I think, for challenges that come up, and you worry what people might be thinking, and you put that on yourself. I'm trying to think if I did that differently with my son and my daughter. They were just entirely different people. So I think the experience parenting each of them was so different that I don't know that I can compare necessarily the guilt that I put on myself, but it's significant either way. I mean, no matter how you're parenting, if you're invested, which any good parent should be, no matter where your child came from, you will be reflective, and you will think about how to do better, how to always do better, right? But I do wish that there was less of a stigma in terms of talking about any challenges that you're facing, because I felt very alone during some of my struggles, because I didn't know anyone else at the time who had adopted a child. And I don't even know, trying to think if Facebook was a thing when he was really little, maybe not, but not like it is now. It wasn't like I could join groups and, collaborate and talk with people and strategize and things like that.
Right.
So it's hard. It's really hard. And then you may pick up a book, but you may not resonate with what that author has to say. And then that might make you be even more critical of yourself. So before we started recording, you mentioned something, and I would love to ask you to dive into this a little bit more. And forgive me, listeners and people who hear this, if you think it doesn't relate to dogs, but I really think it does, because I think parenting in general, you're parenting dogs, you're parenting kids, whatever you're parenting, a lot of these feelings that you're encountering are the same. So I do think that this relates to both. And also, if you have a dog and an adopted child, you still have to process all of these experiences, because I think one will influence the other. That, for example, if I'm feeling triggered about something that my dog did, I may unintentionally take that out on my child, or vice versa. I may not be as patient with my dog because I'm frustrated with what happened with my child. But what we were talking about before is that there are some common things that people think they know, and I'm putting "know" in air quotes, you can see that, but they're not true. So there's sort of untruths about adopted children and about parenting adopted children. I don't know that they're myths necessarily, maybe they're misunderstandings, but I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about maybe some mindset things that you wish that people could maybe consider so that they could feel better in the whole process.
So most of the research about adoption started out coming from practicing clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, and the literature around adoption came out of their experiences dealing with their clients or patients. And so it was biased towards what people reported about their experiences that they were pained by. And so what we knew, in air quotes, about adoption was based on a skewed sample of adopted people. And finally, a psychologist named David Brzezinski thought we should have some research that is based on community samples, not families or individuals who are struggling, but what about all the other families that are out there? And that really started representatively sampled adoption research, which disconfirmed some of the truths that had been out there based on clinical samples. And what they found was that the vast majority of adoptees were doing quite well within the normal limits, normal range, and families were satisfied with their experience. So there is a whole network, an international network of adoption researchers that I've been involved with. There have been 7 international meetings on adoption research, and I've been at 6 of them. I missed the very first one. I've presented research that I've done at those meetings, and those meetings, while they acknowledge and try to understand common difficulties in adoption, basically the strongest message that comes out of them is that open communication in adoptive families goes farther than most people think to make the normative challenges manageable. But families need the support. Parents need the reassurance that just because, parents often will say, we think our child is fine with adoption. They don't bring it up. And if they brought it up, we would be happy to talk about it. But the kids are thinking about it. I mean, we know adoptive kids wonder about it. They think about it. They are curious, and it's part of their identity and who they are. So there may be people in their life that are sort of figments of their imaginations. And some of them want to know, and some of them don't want to know. There's a complete range of kind of responses to that in kids. And it used to be that it was thought to be unhealthy to not be curious. And no, wait, sorry. It used to be that it was thought it was unhealthy to be curious.
Oh,
Now it's shifted with greater openness about adoption. It's shifted, so there might be something wrong if you don't want to know. But the fact is that there's an individual kind of orientation to that, and there are developmental changes about that. There are ages when kids, particularly adolescents, when kids are more curious and they're sort of wrestling with, what does this mean about me? What do these other people mean about me? You know, and now in this age of open adoption, there are more, in many domestic adoptions, kids are more likely to have some information. And so I developed a workshop that is called Inquisitive Minds, and it is focused on helping parents feel prepared for the earliest conversations about adoption, so that they are tuned into their child and what their child wonders about and asks them about, and that they can respond with confidence and be encouraging of their child's questions and feelings. It's loaded for some kids and it's not loaded for other kids. And what you said about parents can find resources that don't necessarily click for them. And often they override their own intuition because the experts say, at this age, my child needs to know this, but not necessarily. I mean, kids don't only learn by talking. So there are many things that they could be picking up on and absorbing and weaving into their identity that are not based on conversations. So it's really, it troubles me when parents override their intuition because they know their kids best. I mean, you know that parents of canines or felines know their animal best. And even if a breed has a reputation, that particular dog doesn't necessarily fit that reputation. So, but I think that it's when my daughter was young, I can remember being a psychologist who knew the research. I can remember vacillating between she's fine and she's going to do fine, but what about this? Like, what about kids struggling with this? And I've sort of flipped back and forth in terms of my mindset about registering how things were going versus, okay, but at that point, she's 34 now. So this was way before Facebook. But the thing I wanted to say is adopted people are about 2 to maybe 4% of the population, depending on how narrowly you define it. That is, I calculated this once for a chapter that I was writing about adoption. And I applied this to my daughter's high school, which is the largest high school in the state of Michigan, based on those figures, in a class of 30 students, maybe 1.5 of them might be adopted. And the trickiest part is you might not know because they might not ever feel comfortable acknowledging that. So in some communities, people will often say, oh, we have a lot of adoption in our community. They might know other adoptive families, but they don't probably have nearly as much in terms of relative to the non-adoptive families as they think.
Mhm.
So what I want to do online is to create a virtual community for adoptive parents so that they can check out other people's experiences. They can say, what does it mean that we're struggling with this at this age? And take some of that worry and put it out there for conversation in an accurate way
Mhm.
to counter
I
some of
love
the
that.
myths.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I think what resonates with me the most, well, almost the most, it ranks up there with what you just said, is really just how much parenting, whether it's a dog or a child, is really about the individual in front of you rather than the idea of what you think it's supposed to be, right? Whether because a 5-year-old typically does X, Y, and Z that mine will, it's kind of absurd. I mean, it's nice to have a benchmark. It's nice to have some, some data that says, oh, I suppose it's about time to start talking or being able to use the toilet or whatever, just because you may not know anything. So it's great to just have some idea, ballpark. But very much the individuality of the person, and that development is on a continuum. That just because you're a certain age doesn't mean you're at that same developmental stage, right? Not all 2-year-olds are created equal. And same with dogs, some dogs don't hit social maturity until they're 4 or 5 years old, while others hit social maturity around the age of 2, and behavior can shift significantly at social maturity in dogs. And so, our expectations have to vary. They have to adjust to accommodate where each individual actually is on that continuum. I guess one thing that would be really helpful to the people seeing this or listening to this would be any tips you would have from the parent support perspective of coping with stress, coping with uncertainty, because there's uncertainty with everything. My adoption process was all over the place. We adopted our son from Guatemala. And so it was somewhat predictable, but then you get in line essentially through our adoption agency, you work your way through the queue. And it was sort of one of those, like when the next baby's born and you're at the top of the line, that's your kid. It was different. It wasn't like we were chosen by a particular family. We were matched with one baby, and then the birth mother changed her mind and decided to keep him. And I was really sad for about an hour. And then I was really happy for her that she got to choose. Right. And that just made me so happy for her that, that she was in a situation that she felt that was the best choice for her, and that she wasn't being coerced to do something that she didn't want to do. And I thought, well, that's good. That's going to be good for everybody. Right. And then it was back in the queue. We went, we didn't know how long that would be. And then there were some government delays with paperwork. And so it was just all very confusing. And I was impatient and feeling extraordinarily maternal. I actually did what I would advise everyone else in the world not to do. I adopted a dog while I was waiting because I didn't know what to do with my maternal energy that was just like bursting at the seams. I had another child already. My daughter, they're 20 months apart, but he came home when he was 5 months old. So she was about 2 when he got home from Guatemala. So I had her, and obviously I was loving on her, but I had this, urging, I don't know, my body was doing something crazy. And so I adopted a dog in the meantime, which was kind of absurd now that I know what I know. We got incredibly lucky, and this dog was a saint. He was so good. And I was lucky. I was absolutely lucky. It could have been a disaster because I didn't know anything. But my stress levels were all over the place, and I was not my best self because I would get impatient and I would get frustrated. And do you have strategies for somebody who either has their baby and is, I don't know, maybe you have a name for it, there's postpartum depression when you have a child. And I went through that when my son was adopted and came home. I tanked, and I was so upset that I tanked because I was so excited. I adopted a dog, for goodness sake. Like, but I really struggled. And part of that had to do with his developmental delays that I didn't know about, and that it was hard to bond with him at first. And so there's a huge range of emotions, whether it's that you're waiting for something to happen, or you don't feel the way you thought you were going to feel once it does happen, because there's been such a runway leading up to it. Just any tips on just coping? I guess that's very broad. That's a very broad question. I apologize, because we could talk for another 2 hours, which we don't have time to do, but just anything, just any nugget, one little gem, and then they can take your class for more. But
I think that what you said about the range of possibilities and healthy possibilities for how it might go is just really important for parents to keep in mind, because they do put a lot of pressure on themselves, and especially when with the misunderstandings about attachment, parents are likely to feel like, oh my gosh, it's not happening, and there's a critical window, and we're going to be outside of it, and then what is that going to mean? And there is just undue strain over that. So they have to, I think, keep in mind that there are many, many variations, all of which can lead to a satisfying and healthy outcome for you and your child. And there's much of it that just takes time. And that everybody, there's pressure on everybody. There may be pressure on other kids who are already in the family, and there is a contagion to the worry and uncertainty that can just complicate things even more. But I worked with a family once who had adopted both of their daughters, but the second one had a very extremely painful and abrupt transition from the foster family that she had been living with, because it was so painful for them to give her up. And the mother, when they came to work with me, I think she'd been with them maybe for 5 or 6 months. The mother and the daughter had grown very close to the dad, but had been keeping her distance from the mom. And the mom was very distressed. The older child had special needs, so she required a lot of attention and had health needs. But this mom was beside herself at feeling like it isn't happening. This is foreboding something, a really bad outcome. Well, you have to be, as a professional dealing with situations like this, I am always curious about the story, because there are usually clues in the story that explain what is happening. And in this case, the clues were that they adopted from Latin America. The dad was very Nordic looking, tall, blonde. The mom was short, brown hair, and undoubtedly looked very much like the foster mom. And this little girl could not connect. I mean, she was grieving the mom she lost. And I thought that her mom was just too reminiscent of the mom she lost. So the mom kept trying to reach her and make it work. And I said to her, you need to give this time. You need to let her come to you. And she relaxed. and it took a little more time, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, when she backed off and said, okay, I'm going to let dad be the main attachment figure right now for her, because he doesn't remind her of anybody.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be, and on our team, we'll have a little bit of, dad and her, sister and me, and we'll just play this out. But mom's anxiety came down like that. And it all started straightening itself out. I mean, this little girl grew incredibly attached to her. She just needed her own time. So hopefully stories like that. And that's the reason that there needs to be community for adoptive parents, and that's the reason I shared in my clinical work. I was always sharing stories without totally anonymously. Nobody knew who I was talking about. Sharing stories and just normalizing all these variations on how it can go. And you don't have to jump to the conclusion that because you're facing a challenge, it's a sign of trouble.
It's really interesting because I also have a membership for parents with dogs. It's very similar to what you're doing. And some of our members, are really open about talking about how hard it has been to maybe bring home a dog into their family with existing children, because they had an idea of what they thought that was going to look like. The dog and kids are going to be best friends, and it's going to be just like Lassie and blah, blah, blah. And then there's regret. Then sometimes the parents are thinking, oh my gosh, I think I made a mistake. I'm having trouble bonding with the dog, or the dog is afraid of my husband, or the dog is afraid of me, or the dog actually had trauma that I didn't know about, or whatever. It's so similar. I mean, I don't at all mean to offend anyone for comparing kids and dogs, but parenting and loving hard is the same. It really is. And the parenting journey is the same. And I think one of the messages that I'm getting from you, and I'm finding this really validating on a personal level as well, is just how important it is for families to find someone they trust, whether it's you or whether it's me, that has a unique area of expertise in the thing that may be the most troubling to them, to help them get through it. Because I really do understand dog behavior, and I can translate that for people, knowing how parents get through the day, because I've done it. And I was a teacher for 16 years. So I saw a lot of parents doing it. So I did it, and I saw lots of families doing it. So it's just such an interesting thing, because I think you and I each offer a really unique perspective to say, hey, okay, I know getting ready for school is the hardest time of the day because everyone needs you at the same time. Let's talk about this. Here are 2 quick strategies that will take some pressure off your plate, because you can't be your best parenting self if you feel like your head's going to pop off, And so what you're offering and what I'm offering are both just relief. I think that's what we're trying to do, is just help people feel seen, help people feel understood, so that they can feel physically and emotionally safer as they navigate whatever it is they're navigating. For me, it's keeping kids and dogs safe, but parents sane. And for you, it's helping parents navigate this process of getting to know the unknown and to navigate the unpredictable, right? So it's so interesting.
And to remain curious. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
But to remain curious for those kinds of clues that give you a sense, if you put yourself in the child's shoes or the dog's shoes and think to yourself, okay, how did this creature's environment just change? And what might that feel like to them? So that if a dog is growling suddenly, you think about, okay, when does that happen? What's going on? How are others around that? How is the rest of the team responding at that moment?
I'm giggling because I have a checklist that's exactly what you just said, which is, why did your dog growl at your toddler? And it takes you through, did this happen? Did this happen? Did this happen? Because you just get emotional about it. Oh my gosh, this terrible thing just happened. But I want people to be curious and aware of what's happening surrounding them. What could have caused it? Let's take a break and let's be grateful that the dog told you something was bothering them, right? Let's be grateful for that communication.
Exactly.
I love that. Get curious. I think that's going to be the name of this episode. Get curious, but I think it's really great. I'm going to have to sign off. I have a client soon. What I would love for you to do is tell people where they can find you. And then what I will do is I will provide links to any resources you would like. I can link to that organization you mentioned with the conferences that you presented at, anything that you would like to share, articles, anything. You can send me a list of those and I will share them as well.
Okay, so the way to find out more about my business, which is called Kinestry, is Kinestry as in sounds like chemistry, but is really sort of the science of and artistry of creating belonging in your family, is kinestryadoption.com/contact. Would be a way to get on my mailing list. And one of the things that I'm doing is a series that I call Adoption Did You Know? ... where I provide little tidbits of accurate, sort of research-based information about adoption that will alert parents about things to think about, but also sort of challenge some of those myths and assumptions and negative stereotypes that are out there that, float in the air around adoptive families and just need to be named, basically. So I would love it if people would, wanted to hear more about that. And I send emails about other content too. So
good.
That would be
well,
fun.
you're a I'm mixing up my words, a kind and compassionate person who just takes the edge off already. I feel that. So I think you'll be a really great resource for anyone who has questions about this or who is navigating the adoption process. And between the two of us, we've got you covered if you've got a dog in the house as well, or if you're thinking about adding one as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Kris. I really, really do.
You're very welcome.
It.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. If you're a parent and you would love someone you could talk to about your kids and dogs at any time and be part of a great community of other like-minded parents, please visit www.safekidsanddogs.com so you can learn more about the Pooch Parenting Society. If you're a dog professional and would love to build your confidence working with families who have children and dogs, I would love to invite you to join the Pooch Parenting Coach Collective. To get more information or to join the waitlist, please visit www.safekidsanddogs.com/coach-collective. I would love to have you inside the community so that you can say yes to more clients. Take care.